Have you ever watched someone lose everything they work for, only to discover that the smallest acts of kindness were quietly building a future they never imagined? What if the person who destroyed your career suddenly stood before you, not in a boardroom, but behind the front door of the very neighbor you had been helping every single day? This is the unforgettable story of a single father whose compassion never stopped, even when life gave him every reason to give up. Stay until the end, because this journey will remind you that kindness is never wasted, even when no one seems to notice. Before we begin, if you believe kindness deserves a second chance and that good people should never give up, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to Dot. Every subscription helps us continue sharing stories that inspire hearts around the world. Daniel Carter had never imagined that one ordinary Monday morning would erase 15 years of hard work. At 37 years old, he was a devoted single father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, after losing his wife to cancer 5 years earlier. Every day had become a balancing act between school lunches, homework, late-night laundry, and his job as a senior operations supervisor at one of the city's fastest-growing logistics companies. Life was far from easy, but Daniel believed that honest work and kindness would eventually pay off. Unfortunately, the company's newly appointed CEO, Victoria Bennett, believed only in numbers, efficiency, and cutting costs wherever possible. She barely knew the employees whose lives depended on the company, yet she quickly became feared for making ruthless decisions without learning anyone's story. When the company announced another restructuring, Daniel worked overtime for weeks trying to protect the jobs of his team. He skipped meals, stayed late, and even slept in his office several nights. None of it mattered. During a brief meeting that lasted less than 4 minutes, Victoria informed him that his position had been eliminated. She thanked him for his years of service without making eye contact, handed him a termination package, and walked away before he could explain how desperately he needed the job to support his daughter. The security guard escorted him out while younger employees silently watched, too frightened to speak. Losing the job shattered Daniel's confidence, but bills did not wait for broken hearts. Mortgage payments piled up. Sophie's school expenses continued. His savings disappeared faster than he expected. He applied for dozens of positions, yet every interview ended with polite rejection emails. Companies wanted younger candidates willing to accept lower salaries. Still, Daniel refused to let Sophie see his fear. Every morning he smiled while making pancakes, walked her to school, and promised that everything would be all right someday. Across the street lived 83-year-old Margaret Wilson, a cheerful widow whose children had moved across the country years earlier. Arthritis had made simple tasks almost impossible. Carrying groceries, mowing the lawn, replacing light bulbs, or even reaching the mailbox became painful challenges. Daniel noticed her struggling one rainy afternoon while he was returning from another unsuccessful interview. Without hesitation, he carried her groceries inside. She thanked him with tears in her eyes because no one had stopped to help in weeks. That small moment quietly became part of Daniel's daily routine. Every morning after dropping Sophie at school, he checked on Margaret before searching for work. Sometimes he repaired loose steps on her porch. Other days he fixed leaking faucets, changed smoke detector batteries, cleaned gutters, or brought fresh groceries using the little money he had left. When he cooked dinner, he often prepared an extra meal and delivered it to her before returning home. Margaret repeatedly offered to pay him, but Daniel always refused. He believed helping someone who had no one else was simply the right thing to do. The neighborhood noticed. Children waved at Daniel while riding bicycles. Elderly couples admired the young father who never complained despite obvious hardships. Sophie adored Margaret, calling her Grandma Maggie. After school, they often spent afternoons baking cookies together, while Daniel searched online for employment opportunities. Their modest little community slowly became a family connected not by blood but by compassion. Months passed. Daniel eventually found part-time work delivering groceries, working evening stocking shelves, and taking small handyman jobs during weekends. The income barely covered necessities, yet he remained grateful because it allowed him to keep their small home. Every exhausting day ended the same way, with one final visit to Margaret's house to make sure she was safe before going home with Sophie. One cool autumn afternoon, Margaret failed to answer her door. Daniel felt an unfamiliar knot in his stomach. After hearing a faint cry from inside, he called emergency services and entered through an unlocked back door. He found Margaret collapsed beside the kitchen table after suffering a fall. The paramedics later explained that another hour alone might have changed everything. She survived because someone cared enough to check. Following several weeks in rehabilitation, Margaret returned home stronger but still needing assistance. Daniel increased his visits despite his growing financial struggles. He never mentioned how close he was to losing his own house. Margaret quietly observed everything. She noticed worn-out shoes, patched jackets, and the constant exhaustion behind his smile. She often wondered why such a good man seemed to carry so much pain. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Daniel carried 2 bags of groceries to Margaret's front porch just as he had done hundreds of times before. He knocked gently, expecting her familiar smile. Instead, the front door slowly opened, and standing there was Victoria Bennett. Time seemed to stop. Daniel immediately recognized the elegant business suit, confident posture, and unmistakable face of the woman who had fired him without a second thought. Victoria looked equally stunned. Neither of them had expected this impossible meeting. The grocery bags nearly slipped from Daniel's hands as memories of that humiliating dismissal flooded back. Victoria had arrived unexpectedly after learning that her elderly Aunt Margaret had recently suffered a serious accident. Years of relentless work had distanced her from most of her family. She had convinced herself that sending expensive gifts was enough to replace visits. When she finally arrived, every neighbor she met spoke about one person instead of praising her success. They all spoke about Daniel, the unemployed single father who never missed a day helping Margaret. Inside the house, Victoria noticed shelves Daniel had repaired, grab bars he had installed, freshly prepared meals labeled with dates, family photographs including Sophie and Margaret laughing together, and a notebook filled with medication schedules written carefully in Daniel's handwriting. Every corner of the home reflected months of quiet generosity that expected nothing in return. Margaret gently explained everything. She described how Daniel had saved her life, cared for her without accepting money, and continued helping even after losing his career. Only then did Victoria realize the employee she had dismissed as another payroll expense had actually been the kind of leader every company desperately needed. That evening Victoria couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, quarterly reports and shareholder meetings seemed meaningless compared to one ordinary man whose kindness had transformed an entire neighborhood. She began reviewing Daniel's employment records personally. She discovered glowing evaluations, loyal teams, and countless examples of him helping coworkers succeed without seeking recognition. She also found that his dismissal had been recommended purely because eliminating experienced managers improved short-term financial projections. The next morning Victoria visited Daniel's modest home. Instead of arriving with empty apologies, she came prepared to correct her mistake. She offered him his position back with a promotion to Director of Community Operations, a department focused on employee well-being, volunteer programs, and neighborhood partnerships. She admitted that the company needed leaders who understood people, not just profits. Daniel listened quietly. Months earlier he would have accepted immediately. But hardship had changed him. He explained that trust could not be rebuilt with a paycheck alone. If he returned, the company would have to treat every employee with dignity, create emergency support for struggling families, and encourage staff to serve local communities during paid volunteer days. Victoria agreed without hesitation because she finally understood that successful businesses are built by caring for people first. Within a year, the company became known not only for profits but for compassion. Employee satisfaction reached record levels. Staff turnover dropped dramatically. Community projects flourished across the city. Daniel's leadership inspired hundreds of co-workers to volunteer at food banks, senior centers, and schools. Margaret proudly watched the transformation, knowing it all began with one neighbor carrying groceries across the street. Sophie often said her father was a superhero, not because he became successful again, but because he never stopped helping others when life became unfair. She learned that true strength is measured by kindness shown during difficult seasons, not comfortable ones. Daniel's greatest victory was never getting his career back. It was proving that character survives even when circumstances collapse. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, subscribe to Dot, and let us know your thoughts in the comments because your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world that kindness still exists. Special request: comment below with the words "kindness always wins" if you believe one small act of compassion can completely change someone's life. In the end, Daniel never set out to impress a CEO, earn a promotion, or receive recognition. He simply chose to help a lonely elderly neighbor because it was the right thing to do. Life eventually brought the woman who had once closed a door on his future to the very doorstep where his kindness had been quietly opening new ones all along. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't begin in boardrooms or million-dollar offices. They begin with a grocery bag, a caring heart, and the simple decision to show up for someone who needs you most.